In 1994, an Italian athlete named Mauro Prosperi lined up at the start of one of the hardest foot races on Earth, a brutal run across the Sahara Desert. 4 days later, he was lost, alone, and wandering in the wrong direction across one of the most lethal landscapes on the planet. Over the next 9 days, he would eat bats, drink his own urine, try to take his own life, and walk more than 150 miles through a furnace of sand. And somehow, against every reasonable expectation, he would walk out alive. This is the story of how a man survived being swallowed by the Sahara. To understand how he ended up at the mercy of the desert, you first have to understand the race he came to run. Mauro Prosperi was a former Olympic-level athlete from Italy, a competitive pentathlete and a police officer, the kind of man built for endurance and hardship. In 1994, he traveled to Morocco to compete in the Marathon des Sables, the Marathon of the Sands. It is often called the toughest foot race in the world. Runners cross roughly 150 miles of open Sahara over about 6 days, carrying their own food and gear on their backs, racing through dunes and rocky plains in temperatures that can climb well past 40 degrees Celsius. It is grueling, but it is organized, with checkpoints and support. For the first few days, Prosperi ran well near the front of the pack, and then the desert itself decided to intervene. On the 4th day of the race, the sky changed, and the Sahara unleashed the one thing every desert traveler fears. A violent sandstorm swept across the course, a wall of howling wind and stinging sand that blotted out the sun and reduced the world to a few feet of swirling brown. Prosperi wrapped his face and tried to keep moving, but in a sandstorm there is no horizon, no landmark, no way to tell one direction from another. He pressed forward, believing he was staying on course. He was not. By the time the storm finally died down, hours later, everything had changed. The checkpoints were gone, the other runners were gone, the course was gone. He was standing alone in an ocean of sand with no idea which way was which, and the desert stretched empty to the horizon in every direction. What he did next, in those first hours, is what turned a frightening situation into a fight for his life. Prosperi made the decision that survival experts often warn against. Instead of staying put and waiting to be found near the course, he kept walking, trying to find his way back, and with every step he carried himself deeper into the wilderness and further from any hope of rescue. He was a trained athlete, disciplined and calm, and he rationed the little food and water he had with care. But the Sahara is vast beyond comprehension, and a single man walking the wrong way can vanish into it completely. Search planes and helicopters went up to look for him. They found nothing. The wind had erased his tracks, and he was already far outside the area anyone was searching. Then, when his water was nearly gone, he came upon something that should not have been there. In the middle of the emptiness, he found a marabou, a small abandoned shrine, a little stone building standing alone in the sand. He took shelter inside it from the killing heat of the day. And it was there, with no water left and no sign of rescue, that Prosperi did something that reveals just how far the desert had pushed him. Believing he was going to die anyway, and not wanting to die slowly, he wrote a final note to his wife, and he cut his own wrists. But the desert had taken so much water from his body that his blood had thickened, and instead of flowing, it clotted almost immediately. The wound sealed itself. He had become so dehydrated that he could not even die the way he had intended. And waking up the next morning, still alive, he took it as a sign that he was meant to keep going. To survive, he now had to do things that, in any other life, would have been unthinkable. There were small bats roosting inside the shrine, and Prosperi caught them. And to get the moisture his body was screaming for, he ate them and drank their blood. When there was nothing else, he drank his own urine. He moved at dawn and at dusk to avoid the worst of the heat, and sheltered during the murderous midday sun. He remembered a crucial piece of advice he had been given before the race, that in the Sahara you should walk toward the clouds you see forming in the mornings, because they tend to gather over higher ground and over life. So he followed the clouds, and he followed the cooler air, and he kept his disciplined, dying body moving across the sand day after day after day. Long after most people would have lain down and given up. After roughly a week of this, he finally saw something that broke the endless sameness of the dunes. It was a small oasis, a patch of green and water in the wasteland. He drank slowly and carefully, knowing that gulping water after such severe dehydration could kill him. And not long after, he came upon signs of human life, a herd of goats, and then a nomad encampment. A young girl was the first to see him, this gaunt, sunburned, half-dead stranger emerging from the desert. The nomadic family, members of a Berber community, took him in. They fed him and cared for him, and eventually he was taken to a military outpost. When the authorities worked out who he was, the truth was almost impossible to believe. He had been lost for around 9 days. He had wandered roughly 150 miles off course, so far that he had crossed out of Morocco entirely and into Algeria. The desert had not killed him, but it had not let him go unmarked either. Prosperi had lost a tremendous amount of body weight. His eyes and his liver were damaged by the ordeal, and it would take him a long time and a series of operations to fully recover. By every reasonable measure, he should have died out there, just one more person quietly erased by the largest hot desert on Earth. Instead, a combination of discipline, grim resourcefulness, sheer stubbornness, and a few strokes of impossible luck had carried him home. It is worth saying that the most extraordinary details of his ordeal come from his own account, told in interviews years later, and the desert keeps its own secrets. But the core of it is well established. A man was lost in the Sahara for over a week, far across an international border, and he walked out alive. And here is the part that says everything about who Mauro Prosperi was. After all of it, after nearly dying alone in the sand, after the bats and the blood and the shrine where he had tried to end it, Prosperi did not swear off the desert forever. He went back. In the years that followed, he returned to run the Marathon des Sables again, more than once, and finished the very race that had so nearly killed him. The Sahara had done its worst to him, and he had chosen to walk back into it on his own terms. If this story moved you, and if you believe the most unbelievable stories are the ones that actually happened, then subscribe, because we have many more true stories to tell.